let me ask you something. What if the security metrics you report to your board, the ones you use to justify your budget, are, well, fundamentally flawed? Today, we're going to dig into a really critical issue in cloud security, the chance that the very numbers we all use to measure safety might be creating a dangerous illusion.
All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to tear down a common myth called the coverage fallacy. Then we'll shift gears and talk about a much better way, evidence-based security. We'll look at how a real cloud attack is put together, how you can actually test your own defenses safely, and how this all plugs into a smarter strategy. And then we'll wrap it all up with one big takeaway.
So let's get right to the heart of it. We've all seen this, right? Vendors claiming really high coverage against frameworks like MITRE ATT&CK. But what does that percentage actually mean when a real attacker is poking around in your environment?
And here's the real problem. We're talking about multi-million-dollar security tools being bought based on these coverage numbers. But as it turns out, the research shows these metrics are often super misleading. They can create this warm, fuzzy, false sense of security that, honestly, attackers are just waiting to exploit.
Now check this out. This data is pretty startling. Researchers analyzed some major security products and found that while a vendor might claim, say, 55% coverage, that number plummets to just 25% when you only count the rules that protect against high-severity threats. Think about that. It means we're making huge risk decisions based on metrics that pretty much ignore the most dangerous attacks out there. Okay, so if the numbers we're using are a trap, how do we get to the actual truth? Well, it requires a pretty fundamental shift in our thinking, moving away from just theoretical claims and towards real, hard proof.
You know, this really just boils down to two different mindsets. The old way is all theoretical. You're relying on vendor claims, you're ticking boxes on a compliance checklist, which is basically a strategy based on hope. The new way is all about empirical data. It's using real attack emulations to get hard evidence. It's the difference between hoping your defenses work and knowing they work.
So, how are these realistic tests actually built? It's not just random chaos. It's actually a really smart modular system. It all starts with something called attack actions. The best way to think of them is like individual Lego bricks. Each one is a tiny, self-contained security test that emulates one single, specific technique a real threat actor would use.
But of course, real attacks are never just one thing. They're a whole chain of events. So attack scenarios take those Lego bricks, the attack actions, and start snapping them together in a sequence. This creates a simulation of an entire campaign, from the initial recon all the way to stealing data, just like a real adversary would do it.
And what's really cool is how flexible this all is. You can use pre-built managed scenarios that are curated by experts to mimic known threat groups like Scattered Spider. Or you can build your own custom scenarios to test for risks that are totally unique to your own cloud environment.
Now, this all sounds great in theory, but it probably brings up the biggest question of all. How in the world can you run realistic attacks on your live production environment without, breaking everything?
The secret is a really clever hybrid approach. For low-risk stuff like seeing what an attacker can see, it runs inline attacks directly against your actual resources. That gives you maximum realism. But for higher-risk actions like trying to exfiltrate data, it automatically switches to provisioned attacks. It just spins up temporary, isolated resources to run the test, ensuring total safety.
And I really want to stress this part. This is not chaos. It's a highly controlled, scientific process. Before any test runs, the platform captures the current state of your environment, it checks permissions, and it uses all these built-in safety guardrails. Then, when the test is over, it performs a deterministic rollback, which is a fancy way of saying it guarantees your environment is put back to the exact way it was before.
Okay, so we know how it works, and we know it's safe. So let's talk about how this whole idea of evidence-based validation actually fits into the security frameworks that your teams are probably already using.
So, a lot of organizations try to follow a threat-informed defense strategy, but there's always been this gap between knowing about a threat and knowing if you can actually stop it. Well, attack emulation closes that gap. You can take threat intel on a group like Scattered Spider and minutes later run a live-fire exercise against their exact techniques in your environment.
It also slots perfectly into Gartner's popular CTEM framework. Attack emulation is the engine for that critical validate step. So instead of guessing which of your 1,000 security alerts is the most important, you can now prove which ones are actually exploitable. It's a huge game changer for prioritization.
Let's make this super real for a second. Imagine you run an attack scenario that simulates data theft. And it works. The test successfully pulls data from one of your S3 buckets. Bam! You now have undeniable proof of a critical, exploitable vulnerability. No more guessing.
So your security team sees this crystal clear evidence, and they can immediately jump into action. They go in, they update the access policy on that S3 bucket, and they lock it down properly.
But here's the magic part. How do you know the fix actually worked? Instead of a complicated manual process, you just click Rerun Attack. The platform executes the exact same attack again, and this time it fails. You get instant, hard proof that your remediation was effective. You've closed the loop.
So, we've gone from these flawed metrics all the way to the mechanics of safe, automated testing. So, what's the big idea here? What's the one thing you should really take away from all this? It's really just this. The future of cloud security isn't based on hope. We have to move on from a security posture that's built on vendor promises and checklists, and instead build one that's based on hard, empirical evidence from our own unique environments. And that really leaves us with the one question every single security leader needs to be able to answer. When it comes to your most critical cloud defenses, do you hope they work, or do you know?
And if you're sitting there wondering, okay, this is great, but where do I even start? The advice is pretty simple. Start small and start safe. You can begin by just running harmless enumeration attacks. These basically just test if your detection tools can even spot an attacker in the very first phase of an attack. It's the perfect first step on that journey from hope to knowledge. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.